The voice came from the audience. "I'm sorry I fired you, Johnny." And 300 people held their breath. It was March 1977. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. Another Tuesday night. Another monologue. Johnny was in the middle of a joke about politicians, something about Washington and common sense, the kind of material that always played well with the audience. He was halfway through the punchline when a voice cut through the laughter. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just clear enough to reach the stage. "Johnny!" Johnny paused, smile still on his face, thinking maybe someone in the audience was heckling. It happened occasionally. Usually, he'd have a quick comeback ready, turn it into part of the show, get a bigger laugh. But then the voice continued. "I need to say something. I'm sorry I fired you, Johnny. I'm sorry." The smile vanished from Johnny's face. His hand lowered the microphone slowly to the desk. The studio went completely silent. 300 audience members turned in their seats, searching for whoever had spoken. The cameras scrambled to adjust. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair, eyes wide. Doc Severinsen's trumpet hung frozen at his lips, mid-note. In row 5 of the audience seating, a man stood. Middle-aged, maybe 55. Thinning gray hair. Simple brown suit. Hands shaking slightly as he gripped the seat in front of him for support. Johnny stared at him. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something else. Shock. Confusion. And then something deeper. A wave of emotion he clearly hadn't expected to feel tonight. Cameras were live when the man in the audience said, "I'm sorry I fired you, Johnny," and the studio of 300 people held their breath. The control room erupted into chaos. Director Bobby Quinn was screaming into his headset. "What the hell is happening? Who is that? Do we cut? Do we go to commercial?" Producer Fred DeCordova stood behind Bobby, hand on the director's shoulder, staring at the monitors. His face had gone pale. "That's..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "That's Bill Brennan." "Who?" "NBC executive. Used to work in programming. He's the one who..." Fred's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's the one who fired Johnny in 1962. From the daytime show." On stage, Johnny hadn't moved. He stood behind his desk, one hand still resting on the microphone he'd set down, the other gripping the edge of the wooden surface. His eyes were locked on the man standing in the audience. "Bill?" Johnny's voice was quiet but carried perfectly through the studio's sound system. "Bill Brennan?" The man nodded, tears visible on his cheeks even from that distance. "Yes. It's me." The audience didn't know whether to react, to stay silent, to applaud, to do anything. They sat frozen, sensing they were witnessing something that had nothing to do with entertainment, and everything to do with something real. Ed McMahon started to stand, perhaps to intervene, to get the show back on track. Johnny raised one hand slightly, a small gesture that said wait. Ed sat back down. "How?" Johnny cleared his throat. "How did you get in here?" "I bought a ticket," Bill said, his voice trembling. "Through the regular lottery. I've been trying to get on the show for 3 years. And tonight I finally..." He stopped, composing himself. "I came here to apologize. In person. The way I should have 15 years ago." Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1962. Johnny Carson wasn't always the king of late-night television. In 1962, he was the host of a daytime game show called Who Do You Trust? He'd been doing it for 5 years. Good ratings, solid reviews, building a reputation as a quick-witted host with perfect timing. But Johnny wanted more. He wanted prime time. He wanted his own variety show. He wanted to be more than a daytime game show host asking couples trivia questions. NBC executives saw something in him too. They offered him a shot, a 1-hour variety program in the early evening slot. The Johnny Carson Show. His own material. His own writers. A chance to show what he could really do. Johnny was thrilled. He worked 18-hour days preparing. He hired the best writers he could afford. He crafted sketches, planned musical numbers, wrote monologues. He put everything he had into making that show work. The executive overseeing the project was Bill Brennan. Young, ambitious, climbing the NBC corporate ladder. He championed Johnny for the slot, convinced his superiors that Carson was the future of the network. The Johnny Carson show premiered in June 1962. The reviews were mixed. Some critics loved Johnny's humor and timing. Others thought the format was weak, the sketches uneven. The ratings were okay but not spectacular. Bill Brennan started getting pressure from upstairs. The show needed to improve. Fast. Johnny tried everything. He retooled sketches. He brought in different guests. He adjusted the monologue style. But the ratings stayed stubbornly mediocre. Not bad enough to cancel immediately, but not good enough to feel safe. 3 months into the run, Bill Brennan called Johnny into his office. Johnny thought it was a routine meeting. Maybe notes on the show. Maybe ideas for improvement. He walked in with a notepad, ready to take feedback. Bill didn't waste time. "Johnny, we're canceling the show. This Friday is your last episode." Johnny had stared at him, unable to process the words. "What? You're canceling it? Now? We're just finding our rhythm. Give us more time. The decision's been made." "I'm sorry. Bill, you were the one who wanted me for this. You fought for me. You told me I had what it takes." Bill had looked down at his desk, unable to meet Johnny's eyes. "I was wrong. I made a mistake recommending you for this slot. You're a game show host, Johnny. A good one. But this..." He gestured vaguely at the notes on his desk. "This isn't working. Go back to Who Do You Trust? That's where you belong." Johnny had felt something break inside him. Not just disappointment. Humiliation. The sense that he'd been given a chance and proven he wasn't good enough. That Bill Brennan, the man who believed in him, now saw him as a failure. He'd left that office feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. The show was cancelled. Johnny went back to Who Do You Trust, carrying the weight of that failure. And 6 months later, when Jack Paar announced he was leaving The Tonight Show and NBC started looking for a replacement, Bill Brennan actively argued against Johnny Carson. He already failed in prime time. Bill told the other executives. Why would we give him the most important show on the network? But other voices disagreed. Other executives had seen something in Johnny that Bill had missed. And in October 1962, Johnny Carson became the host of The Tonight Show. He never forgot Bill Brennan's words. "You're a game show host, Johnny. That's where you belong." For 15 years, Johnny had carried those words like a scar. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Now, in March 1977, Bill Brennan stood in row 5 of The Tonight Show audience, 15 years older, his career at NBC long over, his life having taken turns he never expected. He'd been forced out of NBC in 1968. Politics, budget cuts, the usual corporate reasons. He'd worked for smaller networks, smaller production companies, never quite recapturing the success he'd had in his NBC days. He'd watched Johnny Carson become the most successful host in television history, knowing he'd been the one to tell Johnny he wasn't good enough. The guilt had eaten at him for years. Every time he saw Johnny's face on a magazine cover. Every time someone mentioned The Tonight Show. Every time he thought about that meeting in his office in 1962. He'd written letters. Dozens of them. Apologies. Explanations. He'd never sent any of them. What could he say? Sorry I told you that you'd failed? Sorry I tried to prevent you from getting the show that made you a legend? And then, 3 years ago, his wife had gotten sick. Cancer. Terminal. She'd fought for 2 years before dying last spring. In those final months, sitting beside her hospital bed, she'd asked him a question. "Bill, what's the one thing you regret most in your life?" He'd thought about it. And the answer had come immediately. "I told Johnny Carson he wasn't good enough. And I never apologized." "Then apologize," she'd said simply. "Before it's too late." He'd started entering the Tonight Show ticket lottery after she died. Every month. Hoping. Waiting. And tonight, finally, his number had come up. He'd sat through the warm-up comedian. Through the opening theme. Through the monologue. And when Johnny was in the middle of that joke about politicians, something in Bill Brennan just broke open. All the guilt, all the regret, all the years of carrying this weight. He'd stood up. And spoken. Now, standing in the audience with 300 pairs of eyes on him and cameras broadcasting to millions, Bill Brennan continued. "In 1962, I told you that you weren't good enough. I canceled your variety show. And then I tried to prevent you from getting the Tonight Show. I told the other executives you'd already failed and didn't deserve another chance." A ripple went through the studio audience. Some gasped. Others whispered to their neighbors. Everyone suddenly understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Johnny stood completely still behind his desk. His face was unreadable, a mask of composure that he'd perfected over 15 years of live television. But his hand gripping the desk edge betrayed him. His knuckles were white. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny stepped out from behind his desk. The control room exploded. "What is he doing?" Bobby Quinn shouted. "Get him back to the desk. We need to go to commercial." "No," Fred de Cordova said quietly. "Let him go." Johnny walked across the studio floor toward the audience section. Not quickly. Deliberately. Every step measured. The cameras followed him, operators scrambling to keep him in frame. The audience members in the front rows leaned back slightly, unsure what was about to happen. Johnny walked up the aisle steps, moving through the seated crowd, until he stood directly in front of Bill Brennan. They were maybe 3 feet apart. Two men. 51 and 55 years old. Carrying 15 years of history between them. "Bill," Johnny said quietly, though the microphones still caught every word. "Why now? Why tonight?" Bill's face crumpled. "Because my wife died last year. And before she died, she asked me what I regretted most in my life. And it was you, Johnny. It was what I said to you. How I made you feel. I've watched you become this." He gestured around the studio, at the set, at the success. "And I know I tried to prevent it. I need you to know that I was wrong. Completely wrong. You weren't a failure. I was." Tears were streaming down Bill's face now. He wasn't trying to hide them. Johnny stared at him for a long moment. The studio was absolutely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old, worn at the edges, obviously carried for a long time. "Do you know what this is?" Johnny asked. Bill shook his head. "It's a cue card from my variety show. June 1962. The first monologue I ever wrote for that program. I've carried it in my pocket for 15 years. Every single night I host this show, it's with me. You want to know why?" Bill couldn't speak. "Because you told me I wasn't good enough. And I decided that every night I walked onto this stage I would prove you wrong. That cue card reminded me what failure felt like. It kept me hungry." Johnny paused, then did something that shocked everyone. He handed the cue card to Bill. "But I don't need it anymore. You were wrong about me, Bill. But you weren't a failure. You were just scared. We both were. And I forgive you." Bill Brennan collapsed into his seat, sobbing. Johnny placed a hand on his shoulder, then turned back toward the stage. The audience erupted. Standing ovation. Not for entertainment, but for witnessing forgiveness. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Johnny returned to his desk. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. During the commercial break, Johnny invited Bill backstage. They talked for 20 minutes. Bill never appeared on camera again, but he and Johnny exchanged letters until Johnny's retirement. The cue card Bill received that night? He had it framed. When he died in 1989, his family donated it to the Smithsonian. It sits there today with a plaque. The moment forgiveness happened on live television.